Welcome inside the War Room. I'm your host, Andrew Valancourt, and we're back today for episode 92 of the Dynasty War Room podcast. On today's show, we're going to break down the winners and losers from this weekend's NFL Combine. But before we do that, I want to remind everyone, as always, make sure you are following this podcast on your platform of choice. We're in everything out there, Spotify, Apple, YouTube, you name it. So go make sure you are following along so you don't miss any future shows. And find us on social media as well. So the show, we're on Twitter or X at Dynasty War Room. You can find me as well at Andrew V. Court. We have a Facebook page, YouTube channel, same handle as the Twitter page at Dynasty War Room. So go follow along there. We greatly appreciate it. And one more quick note, as per usual, go make sure that you download Fast Draft and use code WARROOM, all one word, War Room, and you get a $50 deposit match on any deposit to participate in any of their new contests. So their best ball drafts are taking shape now that we're in the off season. So I highly recommend you check that out. Again, $50 deposit match on Fast Draft with code War Room. All right, so with all of the logistics out of the way, welcome back into the show. We're sticking to our bi-weekly schedule for now, but it's working out well because we got another rookie breakdown today. We're talking all rookies. The NFL Combine just wrapped up over the weekend in Indianapolis. We're recording this show on Sunday, March 1st, so we are getting closer and closer to the NFL Draft. And I've got a number of winners and a few losers at all the various positions here. We're going to primarily focus on the winners. It's hard for people to really lose at the Combine, especially now in today's age where a lot of people, if they know they're not going to do very well in a specific drill, they just simply won't participate. So we saw that a ton this week where, guys did not participate in the 40-yard dash or they didn't do certain drills. They just did measurements, that kind of thing. So we do have a few guys that underperformed, but for the most part, we're going to highlight those players that stood out, had some nice Combine numbers. I think a good general reminder to everyone is that the Combine very rarely makes or breaks certain prospects. It's just a tool to help get a little bit of additional information on some of these guys, and it can largely help with draft capital, which is what we then will use as a huge component of ranking these players. So you don't want to double count a lot of this stuff. You see it a lot with 40-yard dash times, especially a wide receiver where somebody runs a 4.2 or a low 4.3, and all of a sudden everybody starts hyping the player up. So don't fall into the trap. Brennan Thompson, for example, had a 4.2 at this year's Combine, and I believe 4.26, 4.28. He was the fastest time among the wide receivers. But, he's a small guy. He's probably more of a special teamer, gadget guy in the NFL. It might bump his stock up to like the 4th round or something like that. But you shouldn't value Brennan Thompson all of a sudden significantly more than you did before, because we all knew he was fast. We understand the general scouting reports on some of these players. As long as they sort of test into what we already think, a lot won't change. It just helps solidify their draft capital and the potential rounds that they're going to go in the draft. So how do we want to do this? Let's start with the tight ends. We'll go a little bit backwards. There's not a lot of excitement at the quarterback position, so I want to start in a bit of a reverse order and talk about some tight ends that were winners of the draft, because I really think that this is where we had two of the most exciting Combine, showings this past week. And the Combine is the tight end position is the one area where the Combine does matter more than the other positions. College production and things like that, of course, is going to come into play at all positions. But athleticism and your speed, your size, that kind of stuff, that really, really comes into play for tight ends. Athletic tight ends tend to make up the best performers for fantasy football. So we do pay a lot of attention to the testing here at the Combine for the tight ends. And fortunately, our first winner, probably the number one overall winner among all players at the Combine, was Oregon tight end Kenyon Sadiq, who was already being projected as a first-round pick. We knew he was a good athlete. We figured he would probably test well, but he tested extremely well. So he came in, we'll start with the one sort of minor negative. He did come in at 6'3", 241 pounds, which is fine, but it's a tad bit undersized for the tight end position. We would love to see him be a little closer to 250, be more like 6'4", 6'5", but still solid enough on the size standpoint there. But it was really the rest of his testing that just blew everyone away. 4.39 40-yard dash for a tight end. That is insane. 43.5-inch vertical jump, 11-foot 1-inch broad jump, both elite numbers. And something with the tight ends that I want to mention. So fantasypoints.com does, they have something called a spork athleticism model where they take a bunch of different measurements, the height, weight, that kind of thing, body type, and then they use the testing numbers to determine what percentile of an athlete are these players. And typically for fantasy football, those tight ends who score in the 90th percentile or better are the guys that we want to target for fantasy. Especially, later day 2, day 3 picks. If you want to have a chance, you pretty much have to be a 90% or better athlete. First round guys first round tight ends, you can get away with being in the 75th percentile or above and still end up producing. But if outside of the first round, you pretty much have to hit that 90th percentile mark. And I think Sadiq solidified himself as a first-round tight end, and he did extremely well in this spork athleticism model. He was in the 100th percentile. So you literally cannot do better than what Kenyon Sadiq did for his draft stock over at the Combine. 4.39 is insane for the tight end position. He would have tested as an elite wide receiver as well. So even if there were concerns about his ability to stick as a blocker, because I do think that's kind of the one thing that people worry about with the two top tight ends in this class is, hey, we know they're good receivers, but can they block? Will they be able to stay on the field enough to get that elite volume in the passing game? So that's kind of the one thing to worry about. But obviously for fantasy, we want guys that can catch the ball, get open, run routes, that kind of thing. And Kenyon Sadiq is the type of athlete that can do that. And he had an awesome combine. So he is the first big winner from the NFL Combine this past week. Now, the other tight end that really just had a great performance is Eli Stowers out of Vanderbilt. So a player that I'd mentioned a couple times on previous shows as somebody that I liked, potentially more as like a second-round sleeper type of guy. Think more of, the range where guys like Sam Laporta went in rookie drafts, but now that might not be the case. He might be more of a first-round pick in rookie drafts because he finished in the 99th percentile in the spork model. He recorded the best ever broad jump for a tight end at the NFL Combine. And even if you looked at him as a wide receiver, he would have been in the 97th percentile of athleticism at that position. So he came in at 6'4", 239 pounds. So he has the height, but again, a couple pounds underweight, which I think is where the blocking fears come in. He was used primarily as a receiver at Vanderbilt, but he ran a 4.51, had a 45.5-inch vertical jump, which is crazy. And then we mentioned the best ever broad jump at 11 foot 3 inches. So really great numbers for Eli Stowers. I am expecting him to push up into probably the early second round from the NFL draft perspective, which should push him probably up into late first, early second, kind of a borderline guy in rookie drafts. And if he, of course, goes in the first round, I think that'll definitely lock him into being a first-round rookie pick. But again, we'll see how NFL teams feel about the question regarding his blocking, and that could result in him being more of a second-round guy. But I think he is establishing himself as the clear number 2 tight end in this class behind Sadiq, and I think that most people should feel pretty good about being able to nab either one of these guys in their rookie drafts. Now, the third tight end I want to bring up, Sam Roosh, and I'm hoping I'm pronouncing his name right. I should probably make sure I follow up on that for the next time we bring him up. But Stanford tight end, he is another guy that was above the 90th percentile in the spork model. So he's a heavier player, comes in at 265. He definitely fits the profile more as a blocking tight end, but he also was great with his athleticism. He tested really well in the jumps. He showed good agility, which is something I think fantasy points actually compared him in agility to Sam Laporta. So, somebody that could go in more like the third round, that is a potential sleeper in your rookie draft. Sometime in the second round is probably where I would expect him to go if he does fall into a day 2 pick. So an interesting name, I think, to keep an eye on. Sam Roche out of Stanford. Roche. And, so he's another interesting athletic player at the tight end position that I think will be worthwhile to follow along. All right, so let's move on to, well, first, I'll mix in some of the negatives, I guess, with position by position. I didn't really have much at the tight end spot, again, because a lot of the guys that may have tested poorly didn't do much. I actually only have 4 players in total listed as losers of the NFL Combine, and I really don't think that it's even going to impact all of them a ton when it comes to draft capital, especially one of those names. So we'll get to those when we get to the wide receivers and the running backs, because that's where all 4 of those players come in. But let's talk about some winners at the wide receiver position. And let's start off with a guy that, I thought I would be the Omar Cooper guy in this space. And instead, he seems to be everybody's favorite. And so much so to the point that this is no longer a guy that might go, late second or, be a mid day 2 pick. He's somebody that at this point is looking like he's going to end up sneaking into the first round. So the hype has spread. He is somebody that a lot of other analysts are excited about as well. So it's not just me. So Omar Cooper, though, is Omar Cooper Jr., wide receiver out of Indiana, was somebody that I thought had a nice combine. And not so much, I don't want to say he had a poor workout or anything like that, but I think there's a couple receivers where the big reason that they were a winner was simply because of how they measured. So their height, their weight, and, in Cooper's case, his 40-yard dash time was very good. So he ran a 4.42, which is a great time. The 40-yard dash matters significantly less for wide receivers compared to running backs and tight ends. So I don't want to get too bogged down in some of those numbers, but it can help draft capital. We've seen it year after year where teams get really steamed up on guys that run well. Cooper, though, 4.42, that's an awesome time. He came in at 6 foot, like a true 6 foot, 199 pounds. So being able to hit that 6 foot benchmark, I think, is nice because it shows a little bit that, he can be a versatile receiver playing inside or in the slot. Outside or in the slot in the NFL. He did that in college. First couple years, primarily an outside receiver. This past year at IU, primarily played in the slot, where the Hoosiers had Elijah Surratt and then Charlie Becker on the outside. Becker, a name we'll hear about in next year's draft season. But Omar Cooper got the size, had the speed, and then something that I thought was notable, he mentioned in an interview that he had 17 different interviews on, his first day at the Combine, which to me signals that there is a high level of interest from NFL teams in Omar Cooper. I think they're recognizing a lot of things on tape that a lot of draft analysts have pointed out that, hey, this is a guy that beats zone. He's got good hands. He is an elite separator, and he's somebody that was just a pure, reliable receiver. A lot of big-time moments for him. And the fact that he came in at the true 6 foot 199 mark with a 4.4 40-yard dash, I think that makes him a winner for the NFL Combine. Now, another guy that was a winner pretty much primarily just because of his height and weight. He didn't really do anything else at the Combine, but I want to mention Casey Concepcion, a wide receiver at Texas A&M. He came in just over 5'11 and a half, 196 pounds, and that alone I think is a great thing for him because there was a lot of fear that he was going to be one of those players that would come in at 5'10", 190 and just be a little bit smaller than what the team actually says he was. It happens all the time where these college programs list players on their rosters as being a specific height and weight that we get to the Combine and they're just not even close to true. And that can really hurt perceptions of players and their draft capital. But here, he is pretty similar in size to some of these other, Omar Coopers of the world and he's not small enough to where the fear of him just being relegated to the slot as a gadgety type player. I'm not as worried about that anymore because I think that's a very capable enough size to be a productive, every down player in the NFL. So there are some things that worry me about him, but I do think that he was a winner from the combine just with those measurements. All right, so let's talk about three different receivers that, not first round rookie draft guys, but they're probably more second, third round players that you're going to be taking a look at in your rookie drafts. And they all had really great combines, really, really good in terms of their explosiveness, their speed. And I want to start with North Dakota State wide receiver Bryce Lance, who's going to draw a lot of comparisons to Christian Watson, who also went to North Dakota State. He is, in fact, Trey Lance's brother, and he's an older prospect, which will hurt him a bit come the draft. But at the combine, definitely a winner. Ran a 4.34, had a 1.49 10-yard split, which is great. That's a really elite number. Anytime you see like anything under a 1.51 or so, that's a really, really good number. So not just fast, but just very quick right out of the gate. He also did this at 6'3", 204 pounds. So big receiver, elite speed. He had great explosive numbers too. 41.5-inch vertical jump, 11-foot 1-inch broad jump. And for those wondering, well, why do NFL athletes even do these jumps? What's the point of a vertical jump? What's the point of a broad jump? It's not just to see, hey, how high can this guy jump? It's a test of their explosiveness. So it tests your core, it tests the strength, of the core of your body, your legs, that kind of thing. And it is some way to help measure your sort of initial burst. So obviously for things like players like wide receivers and tight ends, having a great vertical jump is helpful, and it can obviously help on the field. You're never really going to see a player doing a broad jump on the NFL field, but it helps show explosion, and that's why they do those drills. So good numbers there for Bryce Lance. He's going to be a really interesting name to watch. I do think the age is going to probably keep him out of the top 2 rounds, but these numbers are so good that we could be talking about a late second rounder, but definitely somebody in the mix as a third round pick in this draft, and will be interesting to keep an eye on. So Bryce Lance, another winner at the combine. A few other names here, and I mentioned 3 receivers. There's actually 4 that I want to bring up. We'll bounce around here. So let's go to Skylar Bell at a UConn wide receiver. Ran a 4.4 in the 40-yard dash. That's a 4.40 flat. And he was in the 98th percentile for both the vertical and the broad jumps. So really great numbers. He had a ton of production at UConn after transferring over from Wisconsin. So I think he's someone that really solidified his status as a day 2 pick, which is definitely going to help him. I'm definitely drawn to those ultra productive players, and the fact that he's an elite athlete definitely helps as well. So Skylar Bell is a winner from the combine. Another guy that I've seen projections all over the place on where he would go in the draft is Deion Burks. He's a much smaller receiver at 5'10 and only 180 pounds, but he ran a 4.30. He had a 1.49 10-yard split, and he had a 42.5-inch vertical, which all those numbers, at 5'10, pretty solid. You'd be looking for elite speed for somebody that's that small. And, he definitely came through in that regard. So Deion Burks, somebody that's probably more of a third-round pick in your rookie drafts, because I think he's probably more of a third or fourth round guy in the NFL draft. But, solid production coming out of Oklahoma, transfer from Purdue. And so Deion Burks had some good numbers to help his stock. The last wide receiver I want to mention as a winner is a relative no name coming into the combine. He was not somebody that we talked about before, not somebody that's being talked about as a day 1 or day 2 pick, but Cincinnati wide receiver Jeff Caldwell, who spent 3 years at Lindenwood before transferring over to Cincinnati, where he didn't do that much. 32 catches, 478 yards, and 6 touchdowns, but at the combine, he showed out. 6'5", 216 pounds. He ran a 4.31 with a 1.48 10-yard split. So incredible numbers at that size. Pretty similar to Bryce Lance. And He had a 42-inch vertical, 11-foot, 2-inch broad jump, so very explosive. So I think this will be a player that probably has solidified himself into being picked up on day 3. Now, we're probably talking a later day 3 pick, but if you want to take a shot in the 4th round of your rookie draft on an uber athletic player, Jeff Caldwell could be one of those guys. All right, so before moving over to the wide receivers, I want to touch on 2 wide receivers that I would chalk up as losers from the combine. And I want to start first with Malachi Fields, wide receiver at Notre Dame. And he came in at a 4.61 in the 40-yard dash. Now, I mentioned that the 40 time doesn't matter that much for wide receivers. And, that point still remains true. This isn't going to totally kill his draft stock. I'd be surprised if he's a first-round guy, though, now. And, 4.6 or later still is rough for wide receivers. If somebody runs in the 4.5s, it is what it is. We see great wide receivers run in the 4.5s all the time. But you can't be super slow, especially when you're supposed to be one of these big, tall, fast downfield threats. And that's kind of what Fields is billed as, is a big-time deep threat. He's somebody that, once he gets fully going, he's a long strider, I guess is how you could put it. He's not somebody that's going to get open quickly with his speed. He's not a quick, twitchy guy. He's more of a long speed person. And, it took him some time to get up to speed here in the 40. And just not exactly what you would like to see. He did have some solid jumping numbers, so not all terrible for Malachi Fields, but this is probably a guy that I am not going to be that interested in. Now, another wide receiver, Carnell Tate, Ohio State. He is projected to be a top 10 pick and definitely projected to be a top 5 pick in your Dynasty rookie drafts. But he did not have a very good NFL combine. There's going to be a lot of talk about his 40 time, which was a 4.54, which, as I just mentioned, is not the end of the world. It certainly is a little bit concerning. You would have liked to see something closer to like a 4.48, 4.49, something like that. Basically, anything under a 4.5 just feels really strong. You don't have to worry about it. But, like I said, we've seen great receivers run in the 4.5s all the time, so it's not going to kill his draft stock or anything like that. It's just something that makes you pause a little bit. But the thing that's actually more concerning for me is his size. So he came in at 6'2" instead of 6'3", and he also checked in at 192 pounds. So a much lighter prospect than I think most were expecting, and not by a ton. I mean, nobody expected Carnell Tate to come in here at 210 pounds. I mean, this was a guy that was more in the 195 to 200 was sort of the expectation. I think I'd seen 6'3", 195 quite a bit for him, but he, comes in just a little bit under, and then came in 3 pounds under the projected weight, and then still ran a bit slower. So, something to think about a little bit, but again, I don't think it's going to ultimately hurt his draft stock. He's still going to go top 15, and he'll still be a top 5 pick in your rookie drafts. I just think he didn't do anything to blow away the rest of the competition. With Mekhi Lemon not running the 40, Jordan Tyson not participating, there was an opportunity for Tate, I think, to separate himself as the true number 1 wideout, and I don't think he did that. I think it's still sort of a 3-man tier with those 3 guys. So that's why Carnell Tate would pop up on my loser list from the combine. All right, so let's move over to the running backs, where we don't have anywhere near as many winners as we would normally see in a typical year. And part of that, I think, just comes down to class strength, which is not all that great this year. This position in particular is hurting. Now, the nice thing is that one of the winners from the combine is the clear number 1 running back overall. He's probably going to be the 101 in just about every single Superflex and non-Superflex Dynasty rookie draft. That's Jeremiah Love out of Notre Dame. He was a winner. He checked in at 6 foot, 212 pounds, really good size, and then he ran a 4.36, which is a really impressive number. You love to see that 4.3 mark from somebody that does weigh above a 210. Comes back with a speed score of 117.33, which is a really, really good number. That's something where speed score as a metric where you take the 40 time and then you compare it to somebody's weight. And it gives you kind of an idea of, okay, these bigger guys that run really fast, obviously end up with a higher speed score versus a lighter player that, runs sort of an average time. It hurts them because you expect the smaller, lighter players to be able to run faster. It's not always the case. And so we look at that speed score. There's a couple different ways to use it. I think as a bare minimum, you want to be above a 90. So JJ Zacharyson from Late Round QB in his podcast, he's talked about this in his rookie guides and how he evaluates prospects, how that minimum 90 score is sort of the borderline for whether you can be any good at all in the NFL. And then other sites and analysts use the 105 mark as a baseline for, okay, not just who can do anything versus nothing, who's going to be good versus mediocre. And so being above 105 speed score is another really good mark to be at. And Love clearly passes both of those tests. And so 117.33, a great speed score number for Jeremiah Love, who I'm fully expecting to be off the board in the first 9 picks of the NFL draft. I think there's a number of teams in that 5 to 10 range that could really use a running back. And frankly, he could even go as high as 3 to Arizona, 4 to Tennessee. So any of those teams, 3 to 10, would be really good landing spots for Jeremiah Love. Now, the second running back that would be a winner from the combine, and probably the biggest winner at the position, is going to be Mike Washington Jr. out of Arkansas. So a little bit of an older prospect, but he came in and was awesome. He ran a 4.33 40-yard dash at 223 pounds. He had a speed score of 126.88. That's 99.6 percentile for him in terms of speed score. So really impressive number. He had a 1.5 110-yard split, so good explosion and quickness out of the gate. And he also had 95th percentile vertical and broad jumps. So again, we mentioned the explosive metrics. That's where that comes into play. So a very explosive, fast athlete, despite being 223 pounds. So that can work. That can play in the NFL. I think he certainly bumped himself into day 2 consideration. There's a wide open race to be the RB2 in this class. I don't know if his numbers do enough to push him up there, but given the fact that I don't think there is a clear running back 2, he certainly is now in the conversation and is somebody that could go in the 3rd round. I think seemed most likely still, but you never know. Could pop into the back end of the 2nd round. That would be really exciting for fantasy. But nevertheless, as long as he is able to go on day 2, Mike Washington Jr. is a very exciting prospect and gives us a little bit of a boost and some hope at this position that I think a lot of people are really worried about, because outside of Jeremiah Love, there's not a ton to be excited about. So Mike Washington Jr. No longer really a sleeper because now he's on everybody's radar after an awesome combine. Now, 2 running backs who I think were losers from the combine are probably the 2 guys that were right there in the mix to be the RB2 for a lot of people. And that's Emmett Johnson out of Nebraska and Jadarian Price out of Notre Dame. So Emmett Johnson checked in at 202 pounds, so a little bit light for a running back that you expect to be able to have a workhorse type of load in the NFL. So that's a little bit undersized. He ran a 4.56, which is pretty slow, considering that he is only 202 pounds. He was only 30th percentile in the 3-cone drill, which measures agility. So I think we're looking at somebody that, can he be a true 3-down back in the NFL? I'm not so sure. He might just end up being one of those pass-catching, change-of-pace guys. Now, really elite pass catcher, so he's going to look good in models. The analytics are going to be really awesome for Emmett Johnson because he did have a ton of production this past year at Nebraska. But I'm a little bit worried that he may have just fallen into the 4th round instead of being a day 2 guy, and that would significantly affect how we look at him in a rookie draft. So, I'm concerned. There's some warning flags, going up with Emmett Johnson, given his combine. Now, Jadarian Price, he only weighed in at 203 pounds, so another smaller running back. Now, he ran a 4.49, which is better. He had a speed score of 99.89, so above the bottom of the barrel cutoff, but not high enough to where I'm going to be that excited about it. And then also Emmett Johnson, for context, he had a speed score of 93.44. So that is dangerously close to the, bottom of the barrel number that you want to hit. And so that definitely scares me. Jarian Price scares me, especially given the relative lack of production coming out of college behind Jeremiah Love. Not much of a pass catcher. So those two guys, I'm a bit more worried about than I was before. I was pretty excited about the possibility of Emmett Johnson, and I was excited to see how he would do. And unfortunately, I just don't know, that either one of these guys are going to be able to be true 3-down NFL workhorse backs. All right, now let's wrap things up with a couple of quarterbacks. And it's tough to be able to judge quarterbacks in terms of, how good were they really in the throwing drills and stuff. I'm not going to dive too much into that. I've seen some positive reports about Drew Aller, somebody that the NFL was high on before getting injured and, the miserable season that Penn State had. And it seems like he may have done a pretty good job there. But I want to talk about more of the testing and the numbers. And the two guys that stand out from an athletic perspective that could potentially translate into fantasy points if they ever were to be starters are Taylon Green out of Arkansas and then Cole Payton out of North Dakota State. So Taylon Green had an insane combine, 4.37 in the 40-yard dash at 6'6", 237 pounds. I mean, that is unreal speed. 43.5-inch vertical, which is the highest of all time among quarterbacks. So Taylon Green, we know he can run. We know he's a good athlete. It wouldn't shock me if later in his career he gets transitioned into being more of a wide receiver because he does definitely struggle throwing the ball, makes a lot of poor decisions, but could be an interesting late-round sleeper. He'll probably be like a 4th or 5th-round pick in the NFL, and so that could be an interesting 4th-round flyer in your rookie drafts, at least in Superflex leagues. Now, Cole Payton, I think, is probably a guy that's pushing the borderline of day 2, so maybe a 3rd-round pick, but somewhere in the 3rd to 4th range. And he had some really good passing numbers out of college, but he also tested well. So 6'3", 232 pounds, so he has the size. Ran a 4.56, had a good mark in both the jumps and the agility drills. So he is someone that I could see a team taking as kind of a developmental backup with the opportunity that, hey, should he get a chance, he might impress you. He's had good production, has a lot of experience in college, obviously played against subpar competition. We saw how things worked out for Trey Lance coming out of North Dakota State where, great athlete, great numbers, and just, couldn't really do anything in the NFL. So could it be Trey Lance 2.0? It's possible, but you're not having to pay first-round prices for Cole Payton. This is going to be, again, a 3rd or 4th-round rookie pick that I think could be an interesting flyer at the position. All right, so there you have it. There are the winners and losers from the NFL Combine with the focus on Dynasty Fantasy Football. So we learned a lot about some of these players. I do think that, in a way, a lot of fantasy players lost a little bit with the Combine because there were so many players that just didn't participate in all of the 40-yard dash, the various drills, agility, with the 3-cone, that kind of thing. And then it's just a bit of a bummer, It would be awesome to see all these guys go out there, compete, do all the drills. At the same time, you understand why they do it this way. Because if, hey, I'm not going to run a great 40 time. I want to save it for my pro day. The clocks are a little bit friendlier. You get to do it on your home turf, in your own practice facility, that kind of thing. You kind of can understand that perspective as well. But it is a bit of a bummer for those of us that are paying attention to the Combine and just would love to have those numbers sooner rather than later. But at the same time, I think we're shaping up for an interesting draft. I think it's going to be one where it's going to be a lot of get your own guy, get the flavor of prospect that you prefer, especially a wide receiver. So I'm encouraged about the wide receiver class and the tight ends, especially. I think there's going to be a few good ones. Running back, definitely weaker. But we're going to have a lot to talk about over the next couple months as we get into the NFL draft. So I appreciate you all very much for tuning in. Again, my name is Andrew Valancourt, and you have been listening to the Dynasty War Room podcast.